Final Fantasy VII Remake was a massive RPG filled with AAA goodness. The sequel and second in the trilogy is Rebirth, and it shares many aspects from its predecessor, but with a ton of new goodies. So I had the opportunity to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth ahead of its February 29th release date. I played the starting tutorial and story introduction section of the game, which I'm encouraged not to show to let the audience experience it for themselves, and I also had to play around in a massive open area that becomes available right after it. After over 5 hours, I can say with full confidence that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is going to hit just right for a lot of people. Though there are elements of the game that I want to discuss so you can see what the game is about for yourself and if this game is for you. This includes what's new, what you can expect with the gameplay, customization, quality, and more. So this is a sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and together these games are a complete reimagining of the original Final Fantasy VII, released all the way back in 1997. Though the games share a storyline, events won't be followed the same way. Also, though the game is a sequel to Remake, you don't need to have played it to get into Rebirth. The game explains where the story's at and starts fresh. There's no shared progression. Gear and materia won't carry over, so if you haven't played Remake but want to give Rebirth a shot, the game is positioned to let you play without too much fuss. I jumped right in, not having experienced Remake at all, and found myself picking up the game and playing it without too much trouble. Besides one aspect, of course, which I'll get to soon. Rebirth is the second of a planned trilogy of games, but don't let that fool you. It has a planned 100 hours of content, and in my short time with the game, I'm not at all surprised. It feels overwhelming in a good way. The game will be around 150 gigabytes over 2 discs. I'm told you'll just need to install the game, then keep one disc in the system, no need to switch them around mid-game. The Final Fantasy VII Remake was a more linear experience, where Rebirth is a more open world. After the tutorial, a lot of the world opens up for you to explore. You can walk to points of interest, attempt side missions, find quest givers, continue the main mission, or unlock your first chocobo to explore faster. Continuing the main mission straight away may be a bad idea and leave you under-leveled for the boss, which completely wrecks you unless you build up your strength. More on that later. You'd be better served looking for the Far Cry-like towers littered throughout the map, as reaching one will unlock points of interest around it. According to the devs, they've taken the map from the original Final Fantasy VII, but created it all in a one-to-one real scale. All the dungeons, cities, towns, and more are now seamlessly connected in one big map. They've also added brand new areas, new cities like the Crow's Nest that did not exist in the original, and create a whole worldview of Rebirth. The games are absolutely breathtaking, and the sheer scale of it seems quite overwhelming. I foresee many people rushing to get the chocobo for a form of transport just to get around. You can also find quick travel and rest points in the form of chocobo stops, though you need a consumable cushion to rest and recover your HP and MP. You also need to capture the region's chocobo to unlock the ability to quick travel to the stop, so you'll be collecting those big birds and gearing them up with their own items. While exploring, you can collect material for crafting potions and other things to help you in your journey. You can also play minigames like the car game Queen's Blood, which reminds me a lot of Witcher 3's Gwent. In both, you must win lanes with creatures. You can also find areas to customize your folios, which are essentially skill trees for each character. An example is, for 5 SP, a currency you get from leveling up, you can unlock the ability Wind Current for Cloud, which lets him use wind magic without spending MP. You can unlock abilities in folios, as well as stat upgrades, synergy skills for partners of that character, and more. Each node seems like it provided the character something extra in combat, rather than just simply being a passive stat increase like some game skill trees have you collecting. As you overcome challenges, you'll gain party levels. The higher your party's level, the more skills and abilities will be available in your portfolio. During your travels, you'll come across enemies. You can run away simply by running away, or you can get the first strike by pressing the attack button, which lets your party act before the enemies react. Defeating them will result in experience and loot. During my time with the game, the side missions, although they retain the typical Final Fantasy cheesiness, were well made. None that I tried were tedious and all had their own narrative beat. Speaking of narrative, the gameplay transitions to story seamlessly and vice versa. The characters are gripping and it's clear a lot of work was put into the story. The production value is off the charts, which I'm thankful for because there are a lot of cinematics, at least early on. If you're like me, you'll get invested very early on in games with gripping stories, which will mean you won't feel compelled to simply skip every cinematic moment just to get back to the gameplay. I do feel as though when I pick this game up, I'll play with the original Japanese voice acting and English subtitles, as Japanese doesn't translate well to English. Reactions and comments that sound fine in Japanese sound a little odd in English. But they've done exceedingly well to reduce this, more so than your typical anime translation. At the start of the game, you can talk to Aerith and opt to spend a bit of time with her in a clock tower. This ups your relationship status with a new affinity system, and every character will have their own disposition to you based on how you answer their questions or spend time with them. I'm not sure how exactly this will translate to rewards in the game, but it seems as though synergy skills will get more potent and you'll get some sweet scenes with your love interests if the other games are anything to go by. Yes, you can take Tifa on a date. As you'd expect from a game with high production value, the sound design was top notch as well. I didn't walk away humming any notable soundtracks, so it wasn't at that level, but the music fit the game nicely as well. Sound design is something I like commenting on once I've had a bit of time to really relax and take in the game fully. Those who have played the original Final Fantasy VII will notice the fancy new graphics, but most of all, they'll notice just how different the combat system is. It's still an RPG with each character having their own abilities and gear that determine what they can bring to the fight, but it's no longer turn-based. Combat plays out in real time, only slowing down slightly when using the commands menu to select a spell or ability, both of which you can do without slowing time with a shortcut button combination. You can also freely switch between the 3 characters you have out with you at the time from a roster of characters you unlock as you play. I got to try out Cloud, obviously, along with Tifa, Barret, Aerith, Red 13, and Sephiroth, but only during particular flashbacks. You press square to attack, and you can do so continuously to build up a meter which you can use to fire off bigger attacks and abilities based on your character and loadout. You can also use the commands menu to select a spell which uses your MP. I found these useful if you've scanned an enemy's weaknesses, as using a spell's element they're weak to did major damage. You can also do combination attacks, though I didn't get many opportunities to use these as I was early on in the game and my character's relationships and skill trees weren't developed. There's also a summoning system, but once again, I didn't really get a chance to dive into this. You can still target individual body parts of enemies, especially on boss characters, which can make the fight easier by disabling an enemy's powerful attacks, stunning or weakening them. I had a few problems with the combat system, but I preface this with the fact that I simply didn't have enough time to get used to it. The system feels like it needs to pick a lane, RPG or action, not both. It's flashy and fast paced, but too much so. I found myself wishing for a second to really control what I was doing to maximize output. With the speed of combat and how much you switch around to different characters, there really is little point or time to be tactical. You can't aim an ability at the perfect enemy or have your team target their abilities efficiently or combo well, as you'll be spending a lot of your time dodging and parrying attacks. This is especially true against bosses or in harder fights. You're simply trying to survive rather than utilize the systems correctly. This is because instead of a Devil May Cry style combat system where you can get off bigger, flashier moves and combos, you have a system that's trying to give a nod to the combat that existed in 1997, but also be modern, instead of doing one or the other. Individual basic attacks feel like you're tickling enemies, and they only serve to build a meter. Whereas in other action games, your attacks and combos all have purpose beyond that. It's because as a turn-based game, Final Fantasy VII was about picking an ability or spell to use each turn, so its action version is simply waiting to unleash those. But instead of waiting, you're hitting enemies with basic attacks, so these basics simply can't be strong for balance sake, at least not at the start. Before everyone hits up my comments, this was with a build where we had a little time to grind out our levels and gear, so it's natural to feel a little underpowered. But it's not about the power level, it's about how combat is designed. It just won't be for everyone, and that's okay. Speaking of power level, I didn't talk to anyone after my time with the game that actually beat the final boss of the section. It would 1 or 2 shot everyone in your party and you would barely be able to scratch it. This is how RPGs work. You need to be properly leveled in gear, but with an action combat system, it felt especially abrasive. Because of all this, I highly recommend selecting the classic mode versus the active mode which is an option you get to select at the start of the game. I didn't get a chance to use classic mode, but it automates all of your basic actions, just letting you focus on the bigger abilities like your flashy attacks and your spells. So to summarize, this game expects you to spend time with it, and the combat system is no different. You're going to need to really learn it to enjoy it, and once you do, I'm sure you'll have a blast because it does visually look very appealing. If you find the combat a little much, you can mess with the difficulty settings. I didn't do this during my playtime, but there's also a dynamic difficulty which supposedly adapts to your power level and keeps your enemies competitive. I didn't get the opportunity to dive completely into the vast levels of customization, but what I did try gave me confidence that there is a deep system to allow for experimentation and unique builds. Each character has their own items. Cloud starts with a Buster Sword, metal braces, and power wrist guards, but I very quickly swapped out the Buster Sword for a sleek saber that had a different ability, Firebolt Blade. So items influence your stats and abilities, but you also find or buy materia, which further customizes what you have access to in combat. These can be slotted into your gear, with different gear having different amounts of sockets. I had basic materia that let me cast different elemental spells, but later on you get materia that give different options. I personally liked the steel materia that let me steal from enemies, rank 2 giving me the mug ability. You can also upgrade your weapons, like you can with materia, to bring out their latent abilities or charge their skills, further customizing your party. Using this skill repeatedly or meeting its proficiency bonus conditions will increase your proficiency. Max it out to be able to use that ability without needing the weapon equipped. You can have 4 abilities equipped at once per character via shortcuts, along with 4 synergy skills. Since you can only have 3 characters in a team at once, and you have more characters in your roster than that, you can swap in a different set of 3 in the menu, as well as set your leader. You can shop for new gear at various places, and thankfully when you do, it shows which characters can use the item and how their stats will change. This power wrist guard being good for everyone's attack stat except Cloud. You can also transmute items, which is just item crafting and not changing the looks of an item based on what item you've broken down before. For example, making a basic potion takes Sage and Planet's Blessing, which you can find in the world, in chests, or after combat. Creating a new item adds to your craftsmanship experience, which increases its level. More levels equals better items. In conclusion, normally preview builds are not the builds everyone gets at release and thus are quite buggy. But what I played was flawless. Not a single bug or many drop frames at all in the first 5 hours. I expect the full release to be the same. If you at all like RPGs, Final Fantasy, or fantasy games, you should keep an eye out on Rebirth. You don't need to have played the remake or the original to jump into this one. It has a rich and beautiful world to explore, gripping cinematics, interesting characters, and deep customization. I walked away from my Final Fantasy VII Rebirth preview wanting more. Thankfully, Feb 29th isn't far away, and I'm sure you can check out the reviews then. So thanks for watching guys, for everything RPG, you're in the right place. Ciao friends.